She was traded like trash in a back alley and handed to a man everyone thought was worthless. The summer heat pressed down like a punishment in the back lot behind Miller's Thrift and Pawn. Jane stood still, 15 years old and utterly alone. Her shadow stretched long across the cracked concrete. Her stepmother didn't even look her in the eye. "Take her," Gloria spat, gesturing toward the man crouched beside the dumpster. His clothes were torn, his face hidden behind weeks of dirt and beard. "You want junk? Here's some more." Jane didn't flinch. Her backpack was all she had, stuffed with a few clothes, a photo of her mom, and the last granola bar from the pantry no one let her touch. The man stood up slowly, quietly. No threats, no questions. He looked at Jane, really looked at her, like she was more than just someone's leftover. From the front seat of a luxury car, Gloria's friend snorted. "Good luck, sweetheart." She smirked, pulling away in a blur of laughter and exhaust. Jane didn't cry. Not then. Not ever. But as the man draped his own coat around her shaking shoulders and whispered, "You're safe now," something in her cracked open, something she'd been holding closed for far too long. She had no idea who he really was, or that this cruel moment was the beginning of everything. You're not going to want to miss what happens next. Stick around, hit that subscribe button, and watch how the girl they threw away becomes someone no one can ignore. Before the back alley, before the cruel trade, before the man in rags placed his coat over her shoulders like a knight offering armor, there was just Jane. Jane Carter lived on the edge of everything. The edge of town, the edge of conversations, the edge of people's minds. She didn't ask for attention and rarely got any. After her mom passed away when she was 8, the world got quieter. Her laughter vanished from rooms like a scent, fading into air. Her father remarried barely a year later to Gloria, a woman who wore perfume too strong and smiled too wide in public. At first, Gloria pretended to care. She packed Jane's lunch, brushed her hair, called her sweetheart, with a thin voice and a schedule that didn't have time for mistakes. But that didn't last. By the time Jane was 12, she was more housekeeper than daughter. Up at 5:30, toast and eggs for Gloria, dishes done before school. After class, she'd clean the bathrooms, sweep the porch, and stay out of sight. No complaints, no questions, just quiet, invisible effort day after day. Her father? He worked late, always working late. The once gentle man with tired eyes had slipped behind the glow of a computer screen and a wall of silence. Jane stopped waiting for hugs, stopped expecting, "How was your day?" Instead, she found small routines that made her feel human. Every Sunday morning, she'd sneak to the library before it opened, sit on the cold steps with a notebook in her lap, and write stories about people who mattered. Girls with strong voices, women who made choices. Sometimes, she imagined her mother was still alive, reading her pages and saying, "You've got a gift, baby." At school, she was quiet, not shy, just careful. She helped the janitor clean up spilled juice, without being asked. She gave half her sandwich to the kid who always forgot lunch. She turned in homework early and never raised her hand unless she was sure. Nobody noticed. But Jane wasn't doing it to be noticed. She did it because it felt right. Her room was her sanctuary, a corner in the attic with peeling paint and a small window that let in just enough light to feel like hope. She kept it neat, bed always made, books stacked by color, a little glass jar of coins she earned by doing odd chores for neighbors who needed help. Fixing Mrs. Geller's fence, walking Mr. Price's dog after school. She dreamed small dreams, not because she lacked imagination, but because she'd learned that big dreams made louder disappointments. A warm home, a job at a bookstore, maybe a cat, and maybe, just maybe, someone who saw her, someone who didn't treat her like a favor they had to keep. The breaking point came slow, like most heartbreaks do. One missed birthday, then another. A Christmas where she got nothing but an old sweater Gloria didn't want. And then the silence grew colder, sharper, until the day Gloria snapped. "I'm done pretending you're mine. That sentence was the beginning of the end. It wasn't an argument. Jane didn't fight back. She just stood there, arms at her side, the ache in her chest spreading like frost. She knew what came next. 2 days later, Gloria drove her across town, past the schools, past the places Jane used to visit with her mom, and into the industrial strip where dumpsters lined cracked concrete. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just clutched her backpack, her only defense, her only history, and waited to be discarded. Because when you've been invisible for so long, you almost believe you're forgettable. But Jane wasn't forgettable. She just hadn't been seen by the right person yet. This was Jane's life. Small, quiet, but full of strength no one ever noticed. Until one man saw it, and everything changed. The air inside the towering glass building was cold, calculated cold. The kind of chill that didn't come from air conditioning but from years of silence, deals made in whispers, and people who smiled with their teeth but never with their eyes. Jane stood near the back of the conference room, her thrift store flats slightly worn at the heel, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She didn't need to speak. Not yet. The man beside her, the same man they'd once called homeless, now wore a tailored charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her stepmother's entire closet. His name was Noah Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Holdings. Real estate, tech, media, philanthropy, all under his name, all in his hands. And Jane? She was now his legal ward, his protege, his family. But no one in the room believed she belonged there. "This is some kind of joke, right?" barked Cynthia Grant, vice president of global assets, tapping her glossy red nails against the table like a countdown. "You bring her into this meeting and expect us to take it seriously?" Cynthia was sharp, not just in her tone, but in everything. Her sleek bob, her designer heels, her icy confidence. She had worked her way to the top and didn't like surprises, especially ones that didn't wear labels or pedigree. Others chuckled politely, hiding their condescension behind business jargon. "I mean, she's what, 16? Another exec asked. "Is this take your kid to work day or?" Jane said nothing. She didn't blink. She let the words wash over her like wind through tall grass, brushing but never bending her. She focused on her breath, on Noah's steady presence beside her, on the weight of her notebook in her hand, pages filled with ideas, research, and quiet brilliance no one had asked for. Yet, Noah didn't smile. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked around the table. "I brought Jane here," he said evenly, "because she's the only person in this building who sees what the rest of you are too arrogant to notice." Silence. Jane's heart thudded once, but she didn't move. Stillness was her armor. Cynthia leaned back, arms crossed. "We've built this company on experience, Noah. Strategy. Connections. She has none of that. She doesn't belong at this table." Noah turned slightly toward Jane. "Tell them what you found." A beat passed. Then Jane stepped forward. No apology. No preamble. She opened her notebook, hands steady. "In the Evergreen District," she began, voice soft but clear, "your properties have a 17% vacancy rate, not because of market saturation, but because the digital listing strategy hasn't been updated in 3 years. Properties are being shown online with outdated metadata, poor images, and no SEO integration. I did a side-by-side comparison of 3 competitors. They're beating you because they speak the language of buyers under 30, and you don't." A pause. She flipped a page, revealing hand-drawn charts, neat columns of data in ink. "Also, your community engagement score is the lowest of any major real estate firm in the Tri-County area. People don't trust you. But I've drafted a proposal to change that." No one laughed now. I shifted, brows furrowed. Noah sat back, letting her words hang in the air like smoke after a fire. Cynthia scoffed quietly, but her eyes betrayed calculation now, not disbelief, threat. "And what exactly qualifies you to assess all that?" she asked with a thin smile. Jane met her gaze, unwavering. "I've lived in every kind of property you own, from a broken duplex to a shelter on 8th and Grove. I know the people you're trying to reach, because I was invisible to you once. But I see them, and I know what they need. That landed. Even Cynthia blinked. But the tension didn't break. It only grew. Because no one, especially people in power, likes being reminded of what they've missed. The room sat in a stunned silence, the air no longer cold, but tight with something else. Uncertainty, and the first crack of shifting ground. Jane didn't smile. She just stepped back beside Noah, notebook closed, voice quiet. She had nothing to prove. She'd already said everything that mattered. It was the final pitch meeting of the quarter, the one where futures were decided behind a mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the city buzzed, blind to what was happening inside the 42nd floor of Blackwell Holdings. Jane stood at the end of the boardroom, her notebook closed, her chin slightly raised. A wall of executives faced her like a jury, eyes guarded, pens poised. At the head of the table, Noah Blackwell sat in quiet confidence, arms folded, letting her lead. The air hummed with doubt. They still didn't see her. Not really. Until she opened the tablet. Everything I'm about to show you, she said calmly, was built with a laptop I borrowed, a public Wi-Fi connection, and no budget. A slideshow blinked to life on the wall screen. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed by an agency, but it was clean, sharp, and undeniably effective. Slide 1. Before, screenshots of Blackwell's current outreach campaigns. Cold language, bland images. A campaign that felt like it was talking at people, not to them. Slide 2. After, mock-ups of a reimagined strategy. Authentic stories, local partnerships, QR-coded flyers in laundromats and churches. A clean mobile app that actually worked on older devices. Testimonial videos with real tenants. Faces not filtered. Voices not rehearsed. I ran a test campaign using this mock brand, Jane said. 3 zip codes. 2 weeks. No paid ads. Just organic reach. Slide 3. The numbers. Engagement up 312%. Click-throughs up 400%. 5 local businesses signed interest letters for community co-hosting. A church offered space for an open house. And dozens of comments. From viewers saying things like, "Finally, someone's listening." A murmur rippled down the table. Jane tapped the tablet once more and brought up a video. It was shot on a cheap phone. Shaky. Raw. Real. An older woman stood in front of a faded apartment building. "This was my first real home after losing everything," she said. "The old leasing office never returned my calls. But this young girl came and sat on my porch. She asked me what I needed. I told her, and she actually wrote it down." Another clip. A teenager. "She helped me apply for housing. No one's ever explained that stuff to me before." Clip after clip. Not flashy success stories, but authentic voices of those who'd been unseen, unheard. Until Jane showed up with a notebook and the patience to listen. The room was quiet now. Even Cynthia, polished, unflinching Cynthia, sat motionless, the corner of her mouth twitching ever so slightly. Jane let the silence settle before speaking again. "You don't need another celebrity spokesperson. You need someone who actually understands what it means to be shut out." She turned toward Noah for a beat, a silent thank you, then back to the room. "I've been the girl nobody wanted. I've lived in places your tenants live. I know what it's like to feel like the system isn't made for you. But I also know how to fix it. Not by guessing, by listening, by showing up." Her voice didn't shake. She didn't need to shout. Truth had its own gravity. Finally, Noah stood. He looked across the table, voice calm but firm. "This," he said, gesturing to Jane's presentation, "is the future of our company. Not because she's some charity case, but because she sees what the rest of us have been too proud to look at." Pause. Any objections? There weren't any. Not one. Not even from Cynthia, whose red nails now tapped nervously against her legal pad instead of the table. Noah turned to Jane. Congratulations, he said. Starting today, you'll lead a new initiative under my office, Community Forward. You'll have your own team, your own voice, and the freedom to build what you've already started. The room burst into polite applause, but Jane didn't smile for them. She just nodded, quietly, a soft breath of pride swelling in her chest. Not because she'd won them over, but because she hadn't changed to do it. She had stayed herself. The girl who used to clean floors in silence had just stepped into the center of the room and changed everything. Not with noise, but with truth. The meeting had ended, but no one rushed to leave. Papers lay untouched. Coffee went cold in designer mugs. And for the first time since Jane Carter stepped into that boardroom, the room was still, not out of dismissal but out of reverence. She stood near the window now, away from the table. The early afternoon sun spilled across her notebook, casting soft gold across the words she had once written in quiet corners of libraries and stairwells. Her hands were relaxed at her sides, but her eyes, they watched everything. Noah had stepped away to take a call, leaving Jane alone in a space that, not an hour ago, had doubted she even belonged. And now it felt different. The first to approach was Robert Tran, head of marketing, the man who once chuckled at her in the first meeting, calling her kiddo like she was someone's daughter left behind on bring your child to work day. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. Hey, he started awkwardly. That outreach demo you put together, it's solid. Smarter than what my team's been throwing around for months. Jane didn't gloat. She simply nodded. Thank you. Robert scratched his head. You think you'd have time to walk my team through your research next week? Maybe show us how you structured that engagement plan. Sure, she said gently. I'd be happy to. He paused, gave a half smile. Not polished, but honest, and walked off. Then came Hannah Ellis, one of the strategy analysts. Her heels clicked softly across the marble floor as she approached with a hesitant sort of admiration. I used to live off Grove Street, she said quietly, glancing at the still image on the screen. One of the old buildings Jane had featured. My mom worked 2 jobs and still struggled to keep us there. I think what you're doing matters more than this place likes to admit. Jane didn't respond right away. She let the silence honor the moment. Then she simply said, I'm glad you're here. Hannah nodded, eyes glassy, and returned to her seat. Even Cynthia, cool, commanding Cynthia, lingered near the far side of the table, her face unreadable. She hadn't spoken since the pitch ended. Her silence was once a weapon. Now it felt like surrender. At last, she crossed the room. Not with her usual sharpness, but with the careful steps of someone unlearning an old habit. I misjudged you, she said. That's not easy for me to say. Jane looked up, meeting her gaze with calm, steady eyes. I know, she said, not cruelly, just truthfully. Cynthia exhaled, the corner of her mouth lifting. You're going to make a lot of people uncomfortable in this place, Jane. Jane smiled, soft but sure. I hope so. And that was it. No grand apology, no cinematic redemption arc. Just 2 women sharing a glance across a battlefield that was finally quiet. The boardroom gradually emptied, but the air remained full of something new. Respect. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. One by one, executives who had dismissed her now stopped by to ask her questions, to shake her hand, to request copies of her notes. Not because Noah had asked them to, but because they wanted to understand what she saw that they didn't. Jane remained the same, grounded, respectful, composed. She didn't let the praise rush to her head. She knew what it was like to be noticed only when it was convenient, and she wasn't interested in applause. Instead, she returned to her seat at the table, opened her notebook, and quietly started outlining her next steps. Because this wasn't the finish line. This was just another beginning. Outside the window, the city stretched wide, crowded and humming and full of people no one was looking at. People like she used to be. Jane knew now, the power wasn't in being seen. It was in seeing others. 6 months later, The corner office wasn't behind a locked door or wrapped in glass. It was open, white, bright, and it wasn't in the Blackwell headquarters. Jane Carter had chosen her own space, a renovated brick building in the heart of the Evergreen District, just 3 blocks from the laundromat where she used to tape up hand-drawn flyers. The walls were painted warm cream, sunlight spilled across hand-built desks, and the smell of brewed coffee and fresh-baked bread drifted in from the community bakery downstairs. The sign out front read, "The Forward Center Housing. Healing. Hope." Inside it was alive, not with buzzwords or busywork, but people. A single mother worked at a computer in the resource room while a retired vet helped her polish a resume. A group of teens gathered in the meeting space, sketching out a podcast on tenant rights. On the back wall, framed photos lined the hallway, not of executives or donors, but of residents, families, neighbors, people who had once been overlooked, now seen. At the center of it all stood Jane, calm, collected, and focused. Not behind a desk, but beside a young man at the whiteboard, gently coaching him through a presentation on affordable zoning. "Start with the story," she said softly, tapping the edge of his draft. "Facts make them listen. Stories make them care." He nodded, taking notes, then turned to her. "Can you be there when I present?" Jane smiled. Of course. She never stopped showing up. That was the rule. Noah Blackwell visited once a week, not as a boss, but as a quiet supporter. He didn't bring cameras or press, just a warm handshake and an envelope of grants she never had to ask for. He knew better than anyone. This wasn't his story. It was Jane's. And now it belonged to the people. As for Cynthia, she'd come around too. She asked Jane to speak at a leadership retreat, sat in the front row, took notes, and afterward, didn't say much, just squeezed her hand and whispered, "I get it now." Jane's days were full. Meetings with city planners, walkthroughs of broken buildings with realtors who used to ignore her calls, sitting with tenants late into the evening, helping them draft letters, file appeals, rewrite their futures. But she made time, always. Sunday mornings, she still walked to the library. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She sat on the steps with her notebook in her lap. Only now it wasn't empty pages. It was blueprints, dreams, plans for new centers, new programs. Her work was growing, quietly, powerfully. She never called herself a leader, but others did. And when the local paper ran a profile on her titled, "The Girl They Tried to Throw Away," she didn't correct it. She just smiled, because she knew what they meant. She hadn't come to prove anyone wrong. She came to prove others right. The ones who had never been listened to, never been given a chance. That was her role now, not savior, not CEO. Just a builder, a listener, a mirror. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the rooftops, Jane sat outside the center with a little boy from one of the nearby apartments. He was drawing on the sidewalk with chalk. A house with big windows and stick figures smiling on the porch. "That your family?" Jane asked gently. The boy shook his head. "Nah, that's gonna be mine one day." She looked at the drawing, then at the boy, then back at the horizon. "Yeah," she said. "I think it will." The wind moved softly through the trees. The street was quiet, peaceful, full of motion and yet complete. Jane leaned back against the brick wall, the chalk still warm in her hand, the center humming. Behind her with life she helped spark. Not with power or noise, but with patience, with faith, with quiet strength. She was never trying to be important. She was just trying to matter. And now she did, to people, to systems, to stories still being written. What would you have done? If you were Jane, if the world told you that you were disposable, that you didn't matter, didn't belong, would you have stayed silent? Or would you have found a way to speak without raising your voice? Jane's story isn't just about business or housing or second chances. It's about how quiet strength can move mountains. How the people we overlook often hold the answers we need most. Maybe you felt like Jane before, underestimated, pushed aside, or made to feel small. If that's you, just know your story isn't over. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes, showing up with kindness and courage is enough to change everything. Have you ever been doubted and proved someone wrong just by being yourself? Drop it in the comments. Someone out there needs to read it. And if this story moved you, even a little, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little reminder. You don't need permission to matter. You already do. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.